distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, a big welcome this morning to this seminar on PKI, Public Key Infrastructure and Digital Identity. My name is William G. I'm a partner with PwC China and the Vice Chair of the Asia PKI Consortium, and I'm honored to be your guest, your host today. I became involved in PKI in the late 1990s at a time when the world entered the e-business age enabled by the internet. 20 years on, as we are about to exit the digital age and enter the quantum age, digital identity has become ever more important. Today, we have a great lineup of speakers from Hong Kong and overseas to share with you developments in PKI and distributed digital identity. I hope you will have an interesting day. So without further ado, let me invite Ms. Eva Chan, Chairman of the Hong Kong Public Key Infrastructure Forum, to give a welcome remark. Let's welcome Ms. Chan.
There is an old Chinese saying, 一年之計在於春, which means make plans for the year in spring. We are now in January 2021, and it is my sincere wishes that you can take away ideas and inspiration from this seminar to finalize your plan for the year and beyond. 2020 was remarkable and unique in many ways. It was a year when we make extensive use and heavily rely on digital communication, just like what we are doing today in this seminar, with many of you joining us online and across yet vast distance. Also, it is estimated that we now have some 4 billion people around the world working, shopping, banking, or communicating from their homes electronically. Also, we have seen a significant increase in the reliance on technology for real-time data collection and sharing, and rapid analysis of results to safeguard our well-being. For example, the use of tracks and trace technology to contain the spread of the virus locally and globally, perhaps proof of the negative test result of vaccinations to facilitate safe travel. Yet, such collections of data also give rise to privacy and authenticity concerns, as well as the need for robust security to prevent unauthorized access. In this seminar, our distinguished guest speaker will be sharing with you the latest development in distributed digital identity innovation, and in particular, introducing key initiatives, including trust over IP and legal entity identifier. This initiative works together to ensure that as we can collect and share data, the privacy of the individual is protected, and the information provided can be trusted. This development and initiative could not have come at a better time. And more importantly, their relevance is not just limited to helping us combat the COVID pandemic, but also applicable to a wide range of other online interactions of a confidential nature or requiring total information accuracy. As chairman of Hong Kong Public Key Infrastructure, I, together with my fellow members, have always amended to raise the awareness of the importance of PKI-based solutions for the local community. Under the current global pandemic, we hope to contribute towards implementing practical solutions to address the authentication, integrity, privacy, confidentiality, and accountabilities in the collection, storage, and exchange of data need to be combat the COVID. Our proposed infrastructure focus on building trust over electronic-based communications, as well as enhancing the security of open network. and in so doing, contributing towards building Hong Kong into trusted smart city. Finally, I would like to thank all of you, our honored guests, speakers, forum participants, and support team members who have helped to make this seminar possible or taken time to join us today. I wish you and the family a healthy and a prosperous new year. Please enjoy all the material we have prepared for you over the 2 days. Thank you.
Thank you, Eva. Now, for the opening keynote, we are delighted to have Mr. Victor Lam, Government Chief Information Officer of the Hong Kong SR government. So, welcome, Victor.
Eva, Drummond, distinguished speakers, guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It gives me great pleasure to join you all today at the Hong Kong PKI Forum Consortium 2021. I would like to express my special thanks to Hong Kong PKI Forum for organizing this conference. The forum provides an excellent opportunity for all of us to exchange views on the importance and development of PKI and digital identity. Digital identity is indeed one of the hottest topics in today's digital world and an important infrastructure for smart city development. Traditionally, many of our public services use certain identity documents, such as passport or identity card, as proof of identity. For registration of services which require identity verification, members of the public are often required to visit corresponding government offices to present their ID card in person. Even for electronic services, the public frequently face the inconvenience of managing different groups of usernames and passwords, or carrying multiple security tokens in order to access various online services. The government of the Hong Kong Special Administrative Region is committed to developing Hong Kong into a smart city, and we fully understand the importance of PKI and digital identity in achieving this goal. In the Chief Executive 2017 policy address, a number of smart city key infrastructure projects were announced, and one of which is the provision of an electronic identity, EID, as the single digital identity to all Hong Kong residents free of charge for conducting government and commercial transactions online. This initiative has since then been rebranded as I Am Smart, meaning I for internet, A for access, M for mobile. So in full is internet access by mobile in a smart way. I'm pleased to let you know that the I Am Smart platform, which provides a one-stop personalized portal for government and commercial digital services, was launched 2 weeks ago on the 30th of December. We can now log in various online services using a single digital identity in a convenient and secure manner with the use of the PKI-based fast identity online standard of FIDO and two-factor authentication on our own mobile phone. I Am Smart provides a simple and robust registration and authentication process. You can register an I Am Smart account remotely using the I Am Smart mobile app by simply taking photos of your Hong Kong identity card and a selfie. The system will check the anti-fraud features on the Hong Kong ID card to ensure that it is genuine and that the selfie is taken by a live person before verifying your identity by matching the cut face data and the selfie against the records of our immigration department. Upon successful verification, an IAMSmart account will be created and bound to your mobile phone immediately. You can then make use of the biometric function come with your own mobile phone, either Face ID or fingerprint identification, to authenticate your identity and log in a wide range of online services. There are two versions of IAMSmart account, namely IAMSmart and IAMSmart Plus. The basic IAMSmart account provides login authentication, an e-me form filling function, and personalized notifications. The IAMSmart Plus account, which can be registered in person in any of our 121 post offices across the territory, provides an additional digital signing function. The digital signature generated by IAMSmart Plus has the legal backing under the Electronic Transactions Ordinance for handling statutory documents and procedures. Currently, over 20 commonly used government online services covering renewal of vehicle license and driving license, taxation, employment services, etc., can be accessed through the IAMSmart platform. The online services of public utilities, such as electricity and gas companies, can also be so accessed. The number of government online services accessible will be progressively increased to more than 110 by the middle of this year. And public organizations like the Hospital Authority and Mandatory Provident Fund Authority will also adopt IAMSmart. Indeed, we expect that more and more online services will adopt IAMSmart in the year to come. We also foresee the potential of IAMSmart in enhancing digital financial services. We are working closely with our financial regulators, including the Hong Kong Monetary Authority, the Securities and Futures Commission, the Insurance Authority, and the Mandatory Provident Fund Authority to facilitate financial institutions' adoption of IAMSmart to enable their customers to use digital financial services more easily, securely, and efficiently. Use cases include remote onboarding of customers, authenticating their customers for logging in their online services and accounts, and allowing them to sign documents digitally. The launch of IAMSmart is just a start. Unique digital identities to facilitate identification and verification of companies is another challenge that we wish to address. It will involve more complex and dynamic processes than just handling personal identities. Hence, a new initiative in the Smart City Blueprint 2.0 is to explore the use of new technologies and emerging standards to facilitate identification and verification of companies. We are now working full force with the Hong Kong Monetary Authority on a proof of concept project on corporate identity. It is indeed timely for Hong Kong PKI Forum to introduce relevant technologies in this conference. Upon completion of this proof of concept project, we will explore further development of corporate identity in collaboration with our public and private partners. Before I close, I would like to talk about mutual recognition of electronic signature certificates to promote cross-boundary electronic services. We have been working very closely with the Ministry of Industry and Information Technology of Guangdong Provincial Government, as well as the Macau SAR government since 2019, aiming to, among other things, extend the existing mutual recognition arrangement between Guangdong and Hong Kong to include Macau as well. The relevant work is progressing well, and the three parties will publish the details once ready. I believe the arrangement will facilitate more innovative applications in cross-boundary e-commerce. Lastly, I would like to wish you all a very fruitful and enjoyable conference today. Thank you very much.
Let's move on. And we are delighted to have with us Mr. Drummond Reed. Drummond is the co-founder and steering committee member of Trust Over IP Foundation and the chief trust officer for Everlym. Drummond is going to share with us introduce to us verifiable digital certificates and trust over IP. So over to you, Drummond.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. We're going to have quite a bit of time for Q&A after this and several panels on the agenda. So I will go through and talk to you today about the Trust over IP stack as a tool for building decentralized digital trust infrastructure, which is, some people have called it the next evolutionary generation of PKI, the PKI we have today. So a little bit of background. I have been working on internet identity for most of my career. That includes all the standards bodies that you see here and every instance of a twice annual workshop called Internet Identity Workshop, where most of the standards we're going to talk about here have been developed. I am at Everlym, Chief Trust Officer, and at the W3C, I'm the co-editor of the Decentralized Identifier Specification, which we'll talk about here. And the other thing that I'm very involved with is governance, and you'll hear a lot about that, governance frameworks. The early work on DIDs and decentralized key management I did under funding from the Department of Homeland Security in the United States, who is a very big believer in this technology we're going to talk about. So I want to start by just quickly establishing that there have been these three eras in digital identity. Now we started with, for the internet, we started with, of course, centralized identity, where every site and service had its own identity system, but we still needed the connections to be secure, and we needed encryption to be standardized. And that's, of course, what we did with X500, the whole suite of specification, X509 for certificates, and SSL and TLS and HTTPS. And these were the standards bodies involved there. Then the pain of having to use all these centralized services, we addressed next by developing federated systems where you could reuse your identity and account and login at one service provider with many others. And we went through 3 generations of standards there, 15 years of development, SAML and OpenID, and then OAuth-based OpenID Connect. And again, a new set of standards and standard organizations and industry associations. About 5 years ago, we started into the third era of decentralized digital identity. And what kicked that off was the emergence of blockchain technology. And in my presentation, I will go into exactly the role that it plays. It's in the end, it's not a very large role. It's still an important one, but that was what got it all started. And that led to the development of 2 key standards that we'll talk about here: decentralized identifiers, or DIDs, and verifiable credentials, sometimes just called digital credentials or signed digital credentials. And here, the key organizations, W3C has been for standards. Both of these are W3C standards. There's also the Decentralized Identity Foundation. And then this year, or this past year, we're now in January, May of last year, we founded the Trust Over IP Foundation, which I will explain in my presentation. And that's that's where I met Eva and Curtis and their team. And that's what we'll talk about here today. So why all this excitement and interest in DIDs and verifiable credentials, decentralized digital identity? The easiest way to explain it, just as a basic metaphor, is that we all know that we use the credentials we have today in conventional leather wallets to go prove our identity, for instance, to get on a plane, back when we used to get on planes. And hopefully we will again soon. We'll talk about that. But those credentials we have there, they solve many wonderful problems. It's actually a decentralized system. Anyone can issue a credential. Anyone can carry it in their wallet. Anyone can show it to a party we call the verifier, who can verify the credential and say, yes, you can get on the plane. What we didn't have was a way to do all that digitally. They had to be physical, paper or plastic, or now even metal cards in a wallet or purse, and we had to carry them with us and show them in person. And the essence of decentralized digital identity and verifiable credentials is to be able to do that digitally. That's the whole thing. Now, the core of all the architecture behind that is captured in this diagram based on the W3C verifiable credential specification. It's called the trust triangle, and it's really very simple. All credentials have an issuer of some kind. If we talk about the most widely recognized credential in the world, the passport, the issuer is a passport agency or government around the world. It's issued to the holder of the passport, who then will present it to whoever needs to verify it, for example, at an airport or customs agent to verify that. Now this trust triangle applies to physical credentials, paper or plastic, and it applies to digital credentials the same way. The only difference is that with digital credentials, we have to secure them with cryptography. We have to use PKI. And of course, this is the Hong Kong PKI Forum, so I'm assuming you're all familiar with what I call conventional PKI, standard PKI. What allows us to make this decentralized is this magic piece in the middle called the verifiable data registry. Now that is a term from this specification. It's also the same term we use in the DID specification. And it's a general term because a verifiable data registry can be a blockchain, but it doesn't have to be a blockchain. It can be any system that all the parties can refer to verify the keys and the cryptographic metadata that are needed for verification of the credentials. And I'll explain this a little bit more in detail, but I want to make sure that the key right there at the center, verifiable data registry, that's clear. That's how we make it decentralized. And I'll go into the details. Now, if you're wondering, well, what is this like, the user experience? I am guessing every person on this webinar knows exactly what the user experience is, as long as you have a smartphone and you've ever used a mobile boarding pass for a plane. Because the general picture, that mobile boarding pass is stored in your wallet on your phone. It might be in a specific app for an airline, or it might be in the general wallet from Apple or Google or Samsung. However, the point is, it is in that wallet in a verifiable form, and is typically a QR code. It doesn't have to be, but a QR code that's used to scan and communicate with the wallet in a secure fashion. That's really all you need to know about the user experience. So I want to start out by talking about a few, a year ago, we did not have all these examples. We were building the infrastructure up to the point where now we can talk about verifiable credentials that are either on the market now or are coming onto the market in a major way in this year, 2021. So the one I'm going to talk about the most here, and we're going to have other discussions throughout the day of the conference, is the well-known issue with the unfortunate reality of COVID, the need to reopen travel and reopen our economies with a credential for what we call health and travel. And IATA, the International Air Transport Association, the association of all the airlines in the world, has a specific, they're coming out with a solution called the IATA Travel Pass. And I have a few slides I'm going to show you. This is from their website. These slides are from their announcement in November that they are going to be rolling out the IATA Travel Pass starting this quarter and expanding out all of this year to the point where it's in general availability for air passengers, I think later this year. I don't know the exact timeline. So these are slides from their announcement deck that explained, the issue is very well known. And what they're trying to tackle first is proof of testing. As soon as vaccinations are available more widely, the app will expand, include proof of vaccinations. And they're cooperating with others, such as the World Health Organization, on the data that will be necessary. In both cases, that will provide the confidence that all the parties need for travel. Now, this is a big, complex problem. They summarize their challenges. They've got 4 major stakeholders in doing this. Obviously, the passengers, all of the airlines, all of the governments involved in all the countries you're flying in and out of. But none of this would work if they didn't also have the laboratories that need to issue the certificates that'll be recognized by the governments. So they need a solution. We'll talk later. We'll get down to sort of more details. How does it actually work? Now, these are the principles that they decided to, and they've been doing a bunch of work for quite a while, preparing for the IATA Travel Pass before COVID. When COVID came, they said, we have to accelerate this, but they didn't change their underlying principles. And interestingly enough, all of this was developed before IAG, one of their key members, joined the Trust over IP Foundation and said they turned around and they were basing it on Trust over IP architecture even before they actually became a member of the Trust over IP Foundation. So as you'll see, the standards are W3C and a standard they've been developing called the One ID Initiative, and they work with ICAO, the Association of all the airports. So these are the benefits that they're seeking with IATA Travel Pass. And I want to generalize this and say these are the benefits, similar benefits for almost every verifiable credential that will be coming on market. You can read down through them. I want to highlight 3 of them: the trust framework, decentralized technology, and interoperability. These are the core promises of decentralized identity, and this is the goal of the Trust over IP stack that I'm here to talk to you about. So now I want to give you 2 more examples before we go into more details of other credentials that are coming onto the market or on market, okay? The first one is, let's move from travel to healthcare. This platform called Lumetic Exchange was announced also in November at one of the major healthcare conferences. And it is exactly the same thing of it as travel pass for your health. But in this case, the patient, which you see here in the middle, is receiving credentials from their healthcare providers about anything that they might need to share in the health system. They're receiving a credential into a mobile wallet that they can go connect to some other health institution, or their what we call the payer, their insurance company, or anyone else that they need to prove, I got this healthcare, I had this test, I have these medical conditions. And because all of the health data passes through the patient, it goes into the patient's hands in the form securely in the form of verifiable credentials. It is not only secure, but it also meets all of the privacy requirements, the very strict privacy requirements here in the US and elsewhere in the world. The legislation in the US is known as HIPAA, HIPAA. So again, this network, this exchange network is being launched here in the US by the 10th largest healthcare provider in the US, and it is having a whole bunch of interests that are coming into it. So that's an example of healthcare-based credentials. The last example I will give you is a credential for financial services called Member Pass. And it is being produced by a consortium called CU Ledger. The CU stands for Credit Union. It's a financial cooperative in the US. There are about 6,000 credit unions in the world, around the world. And they have formed a consortia to produce a single digital credential of membership in a credit union. And it's called Member Pass. And they're going to be expanding it to prove membership in any financial organization. And that means it's going to, of course, address things like KYC, know your customer requirements. We won't be talking about that as much today. That will be next week. But I just wanted you to be, now, this credential is on the market in production. There are over 25,000 that are being used now, and credit unions are lining up to be issuing them to their members. So those are the three examples that I want to give you, that I want to talk about as we now go into, all right, so how does this work, and what's the role of the Trust RIP stack? How are we going to address the two main things we're going to talk about here today are interoperability and privacy by design. And security, of course, is there throughout. I'm not going to talk as much about the security aspects because that's the baseline. Of course, it has to be secure. But how it's interoperable and how we're going to be building privacy by design, those are the key things. So to talk about this, I'm going to start in with a simplified version of the trust triangle. And I'm going to use this to explain almost everything that you need to understand. And it's not going to get highly technical. So we can go, of course, very technical about it, but it's just the basic what needs to happen for this to work in a decentralized, interoperable, and privacy respecting way. So we have these three roles: the issuer of the credential, as we said, like the passport, government passport agency, the holder, and we will talk here mostly about individuals as holders, but I want to clarify any recipient of digital identity can be a holder, meaning organizations are going to be holders. And we're going to talk shortly about a credential explicitly for organizations, the VLEI, the verifiable credential version of a legal entity identifier. So that's an organizational credential. And of course, things, all the things we need in our lives, and we need secure connections with, they need them as well. So IoT is absolutely part of this whole architecture. So we'll be mostly talking about holders as individuals, but think organizations and connected things. And the key thing there is they have digital wallets. Now, in fact, all three of these actors, any one person or organization will play at least two of these roles, holder and verifier. Many of them will play the issuer role as well. So these are just roles in a trust relationship. Verifiers are anyone, organization, but it can also be people, it can also be things that need credentials proved to them in order to make a trust decision. And the basis of that trust decision is always that the verifier has a trust relationship of some kind, not that doesn't need to be direct, with the issuer. A good example is airlines and airports trust government issued credentials without having any direct relationship with all the governments around the world. So here's the basic way that the underlying cryptography works on the role of the verifiable data registry, which again can be a blockchain. We'll talk more about that. The first step is the issuer of the credential is going to make the whole thing work. They are going to make a write to a verifiable data registry, such as a blockchain. And what they're going to put on there is the address of that transaction is called a DID. It's a new type of identifier, very much like other web identifiers, URIs, URLs. But that DID has special properties because it's written to a verifiable data registry. What's written together with it is a small file called a DID document. DID document. And that contains the associated public key or public keys, there can be more than one, and the other cryptographic metadata necessary for them to now, with the private key, do the second step, which is as they start to issue verifiable credentials, which do not require any other transactions with the blockchain once they've written that, what they're doing is digitally signing those verifiable credentials with the associated private key. So only the public key is shared out in the public, typically on a public blockchain, but the issuer is signing the credential with the private key. It goes to the holder and into the holder's wallet. Now the holder will go to a verifier, an individual, for instance, if a proof of a passport, and notice credential is issued here, but what was presented here is called a proof. And this is where the privacy comes in. I'll talk more about that. The verifier only needs a proof of what it needs to know. When that proof is presented to the verifier, it will include the DID of the issuer. You always know, okay, this credential was issued by this issuer. The verifier is then able to use the DID to read the DID document off the blockchain, verify the public key for that credential, and finally verify the credential itself, verify the cryptographic proof. So it can know the credential is valid, it hasn't been tampered with, it came from that issuer. And lastly, I haven't talked about it, but the same architecture can include revocation. Has the credential been revoked? And it can be verified in the same way. Now, the power of this whole architecture is no integration is needed here. That's the big difference with federated identity systems, where all the verifiers have to talk back to an identity provider. We get away from that. If a verifier supports verifiable credentials, they can accept them from any issuer in the world, and it's their own policies that determine what credentials will I accept for what decisions on the basis of what issuers they came from. So that is the basic, the heart, what I call the DNA of how everything works. Now let's take an example. Let's talk about the IATA Pass credential. Let's walk through it so you get a good sense. All right, who's doing what, okay? So the issuer of that credential is going to be a lab, a testing lab someplace. Now we'll talk about how they get authorized to issue that, but it's going to be a lab. And IATA Travel Pass, those issuers are all going to have DIDs on a specific blockchain. It's the sovereign blockchain. If you're not familiar with it, it is a public permission blockchain based on Hyperledger Indy, INDY. It's an open source project at Hyperledger at the Linux Foundation. And the sovereign blockchain has been running now for almost 3.5 years. It is exclusively designed to support self-sovereign identity, DIDs, and it's, again, credentials are in production on that blockchain. So they write that. Now they are able to issue an IATA Travel Pass. Again, the schema for that credential designed by IATA, published in a governance framework we'll talk about. They digitally sign each travel pass that is issued. It goes into the holder's wallet. Now that holder is a traveler who needs to go someplace. The proof they're going to need to present is to an airline that needs to know they have that the travel pass and the appropriate credentials for where they want to go. That too is a problem we'll talk more about. So the airline, again, when they receive that proof of the credential, it's got the DID of the issuing lab. So they will read off the sovereign blockchain, the public key, and verify that proof. And as long as that DID is an authorized issuer of the travel pass, the traveler will be good to go. Again, the proof has to satisfy the particular requirements of that verifier. There is a lot of complexity there. We'll talk more about it, but the point is this process can be adapted for any verifier and its requirements, and any group here, which we call a digital trust ecosystem. So this is the heart, again, of how the process works. Now I want to go a little deeper into what your next speaker is going to be talking about, privacy, and the special role we call it privacy by design. And I've known Ann Kavukian for, I don't know, 15 plus years now. She is the mother of privacy by design, which is why it was so great to hear from her today. And the key is this whole architecture you're looking at has been designed to implement privacy by design at scale. It's very hard to do privacy right at scale, and that's why we have so many issues with, excuse me, I hit the wrong button there, with privacy on the internet today and surveillance and the surveillance economy. So I want to be very specific about how privacy by design is applied to this architecture that we just looked at. You saw that we have public DIDs here that any verifier can check. So these are issuers, they have to be very well known. That's not where the privacy issues are. The privacy issues are with individuals up here that are getting private credentials with sensitive personal data, and they need to be able to share them with just the verifiers they need and disclose just what those verifiers need. So the secret to doing that is when these relationships are developed, we use a different kind of DID. It's not a public DID, we call it a peer DID. And they are exchanged pairwise. Each of these two parties, when they form what we call a connection, they exchange peer DIDs just between those two parties. Think of it as a dynamically negotiated bi-directional HTTPS connection because it's very similar to that. However, there's no HTTPS in. It doesn't require, it can use HTTPS as a protocol or it can use any other protocol. That is the point of exchange of peer DIDs. And the peer DIDs for this relationship here between the holder, this holder and this issuer, just the two of them. No one else in the world needs to know about what those DIDs are or the DID documents. And both of them can rotate their key pairs associated with that DID for as long as they want that relationship. They can keep it secure. They can even migrate to new types of keys and cryptography over time. This is a key extension to how PKI works. Now, again, this is one peer DID relationship. When this holder and this verifier connect, it's a second independent peer DID relationship. These are completely, we call them personal, premium, private channels. Very much like the application, the IAM Smart application you were talking about. It's going to use the secure channels that are private for each relationship. Now the power of this design is that it means everything above this line, I call this the privacy line. Everything above this line is privacy by design. It is all off-chain. None of it touches a public blockchain. That only happens here and here. And it's completely compliant with GDPR and other privacy by design, other privacy data protection regulations around the world. So, and for example, the Lumetic application that I talked to you about for healthcare exchange, this architecture has been examined of exchanging verifiable credentials between a healthcare provider who's covered deeply by privacy regulations, the patient, and another healthcare provider or insurer or some other body. As long as that verifiable credential travels securely into the holder's wallet and the holder makes the decision by consent to share data with the verifier, this is just textbook example. The lawyers that looked at this were like, this is beautiful. This meets all the regulations. It goes beyond the regulations, and it puts the patient in the center of their data sharing. So this is, this is a big sea change in terms of privacy. You'll hear more about that from Ann shortly. Most importantly, it means all of us as individuals especially can enjoy the same secure private connections that today you need a web server and a SSL TLS certificate to have for privacy. Now I want to, as we're discussing preparing for this, we wanted to make it clear that blockchains play a role, but it's a very specific and limited role. And I want to just underline that, again, starting with this picture of the verifiable data registry. So if you look at this, a blockchain or any other system, for instance, IPFS, interplanetary file system, IPFS. It's a file system, not a blockchain, but it also can serve as verifiable data registry. Microsoft has built a system called ION that is going to use IPFS because it layers over these. There are over 70 different DID methods that have been registered with W3C. All of them can work, and they work well for public DIDs. And that's what you need if you want to issue and sign verifiable credentials. So blockchains are very helpful as one option at this layer. But when you go up above the privacy line, you not only don't need a blockchain, you don't want a blockchain, because you don't want any personal data or any tracking of transactions and personal data, even if it's encrypted and happening off chain. You don't want it tracked on a public blockchain. There are too many privacy issues involved. So the architecture that the TrustRP architecture says, hey, we have a way of keeping all of that off chain and private. And none of that needs to involve a blockchain. You're storing data in wallets, either mobile wallets or cloud-based wallets, under the control of the holder. Even backup and recovery can all take place off-chain. All right, I know we're covering a lot of information here, and I want to make sure we stay on time. So I'm going to keep going here. I want to quickly mention biometrics. Of course, they're important when you're talking about verifiable digital identity. And the key point I want to make is, again, showing the privacy line, biometrics in this architecture are another type of credential. There are credentials that can be produced in multiple ways. I have a whole separate presentation I can do about that, and there's a special conference coming up. I think it's the first week of February on. I'm trying to think. I think it's called Thoughtful Biometrics. In any case, biometrics such as Face ID or Touch ID on the iPhone are applied locally. That's an example of applying them locally on the holder's device, and then producing a evidence of that to the verifier. So you can apply biometrics there. They can be applied over network. There actually, you can have what we call biometric service providers that provide them remotely. The important thing is it has to be done with strong privacy protections. But they integrate, again, fully. And you can also have a liveness detection, which is a different form of checking a biometric that doesn't involve a biometric signature. So now I want to talk about one more subject before we close with understanding the full stack, and that's the special role of governance frameworks. The classic problem you have here if you set up a trust triangle is, how do all the verifiers know all the issuers? And the answer in TrustRP architecture is what we call the governance trust triangle, or sometimes this whole thing is called the diamond, because it looks like a baseball diamond. The key is there's a second trust triangle here, and the root of that is a governance authority who publishes a governance framework. These also, of course, are called trust frameworks. Both terms are used. Trust framework originated in the sort of digital identity space, whereas governance framework was much more of a blockchain term. But as this emerged, governance framework became the more used term. So that's what we call it at TrustRP. So governance authority publishes the governance framework, and one of the things it will do is it will determine, and there's several ways to verify who are the authorized issuers in any digital trust ecosystem. So it provides a way for verifiers to efficiently know and verify that. Now, this architecture is not something we came up with. Again, just like the trust triangle has been around for a long time, so has this. The largest digital trust networks, some of them in the world, use this. Here's an example. MasterCard, one of the founding members of the TrustRP Foundation, in their payment network today, they authorize all of the banks or credit unions that issue a credential called a credit card or a debit card to cardholders. And they present proofs of that to merchants around the world. And the merchants do not need to know who all the banks are, because all they need to be able to verify is they're part of the MasterCard network. So What we have done with trust OIP architecture and these open standards is say, hey, this same model for establishing trust at any scale you need it, you can apply to any digital trust ecosystem. Let's take the IATA Travel Pass. The governance authority there is IATA. That's what it's been set up for. It's a global nonprofit that is serving the airline industry. The authorized issuers under the IATA governance framework are going to be labs around the world, and they have a very specific plan for doing that, which we'll talk about. Those labs can issue credentials to all the travelers who then can provide proofs to all the airlines that are the members of IATA around the world. Again, now the airlines don't have to know who all the authorized labs are. That job's being handled by IATA, but it scales globally, just like MasterCard does. One more quick example, so you see it in a different industry like Member Pass. You've got KYC. Any certification authority such as the government can say, here are the authorized issuers of KYC data of any kind: banks, financial institutions, utilities, insurance companies, healthcare providers. Any of those issuers could issue now credentials to an individual who can use them at a financial institution to open account, to pass KYC, cut costs, and improve the user experience dramatically. So that's enough. Now that we've talked about all these components, let's bring them together and the final part of my presentation, the trust OIP stack. How do we standardize this for universal interoperability? And this is where we're going to talk about the trust OIP stack that I keep referring to. And I'm going to show you this quick high-level picture. It is a 4-layer stack. And on the right side, you see a 4-layer stack of technology, like the TCP/IP stack that created the internet. Same thing. It's a technical stack, and each layer depends on the one below. And once you get the stack right, you can create huge network effects like the internet. Now, this particular stack, the technology stack, has a corresponding governance stack for the reasons I just mentioned. And what it does is it covers governance at each of the 4 layers. Now, the bottom 2 layers are about establishing technical trust between machines. That's where the cryptography the cryptographic infrastructure lies, the decentralized PKI. The top 2 layers are how we establish trust between people and organizations and things and build digital trust ecosystems. Now, I want to explain quickly why 4 layers. It turns out all technology-based infrastructures around the world, all scalable ones, have these same 4 layers. It's just the nature of technology. And here's an example. We're gonna talk again. I over this ground transportation around the world, right? All of our highway systems and road systems around the world, they have the same 4 layers. The first layer is the roads. Without roads, cars and trucks and buses and everything else do nothing, right? And that's a public utility. It's big, heavy work to go out there and create those roads and make the investment. Now, without the roads, you could have all the road systems. You don't have vehicles, which are private equipment. There are, of course, some public, but it's generally, we all have our own equipment, and that's a whole market into itself. So, but even with roads and vehicles, unless we have the next layer of the signage, the traffic control, the rules of the road, such that we can all collaborate together to drive and have transportation safely, we still don't have a transportation system. And only when we have those 3 things can we deliver the application layer. Bus services and car services and trucking services, and of course, even services that virtualize that, like Uber and Lyft. So this is why 4 layers. Now, if we look at the trust OIP stack and we say, we're going to apply those same 4 layers to digital data transportation. Now we're going to look at the stack. So that bottom layer is the verifiable data registries. We call them public utilities. Blockchains like Sovereign, Bitcoin, Ethereum, Ion, but also IPFS, other systems out there. Whatever will work, we're providing a standard interface through DIDs. Now, they have their own governance frameworks. The Sovereign Governance Framework, I co-chair the working group there. I have for the last 4 years. We produced 2, and we're on our 3rd generation of a governance framework explicitly for a layer 1 utility. Layer 2 is the cars, the vehicles. Those vehicles are digital wallets and the digital agents that use those wallets to form connections and do secure peer-to-peer communications of any kind. There, the governance you need is, do they meet security and privacy and data protection standards? Now we go up to layer 3 and we get into human trust. This is the trust triangle. This is where you can get credentials that you can prove to verifiers. And there you have a different kind of governance. It's credential governance frameworks, the kind of governance you have over a MasterCard or a Visa or a passport or even a Starbucks card, right? They're all credentials that have a set of rules and they're published. And once you have those layers, you can now deliver the application layer. And with trust over IP, what we're talking about delivering and supporting is entire digital trust ecosystems. That's why the name of this conference, Digital Trust Ecosystem. Let's talk about how we can support a very rich digital trust ecosystem for Hong Kong and all of what you're doing together. And I will conclude now by just saying, okay, now let's take all this and go back to the IATA Travel Pass credential and say, all right, so how are they going to deliver on this travel pass for worldwide usage here, right? This is another slide from their presentation where they said, okay, well, we have to have privacy and security. It's got to be decentralized because it's the only safe way to do it. We got to give passengers the rights, and we have to have compliance with regulations all around the world. So here's the 3 or 4 slides or whatever that they showed again in their press announcement for how they're going to do that. And what I want to point out is everything I'm going to describe, it's a digital trust ecosystem. The IATA Travel Pass is creating a complete trust over IP layer 4 digital trust ecosystem that will involve thousands of issuers and verifiers of the travel pass. And it fits this model perfectly. So the first piece of that ecosystem, there's their app right there, is that every laboratory is going to use software for issuing that credential. And all those labs have to be part of a registry. That registry is what Trust over IP calls a layer 4 member directory. That's what IATA is building, okay? Second piece is all those labs, they need to be verified, but they also need to ensure that the credentials they're issuing follow policies in a policy database they call thematic. It's a rules engine, a validity check of the type of test, timing of test, testing organization. So they know that a particular test issued by a lab will meet certain requirements. Like I said, it's a policy database and rules engine. And then lastly, they need to know the airlines and border control, the verifiers all around the world. What do they need and how is that standardized? Now, when you put all those pieces together, you get an ecosystem governance framework. And that is what they're working on right now with Evernym. I'm helping them, other members of Trust over IP all around the world. They're coming together to produce IATA Travel Pass ecosystem governance framework to cover all that. And it's, to be specific, going back here, it's going to be one of these right here. And it's going to include, as many ecosystem governance frameworks does, a credential governance framework for the travel pass. They might actually have a couple of variations of the travel pass, so they have a couple of these. So that's how it all comes together to deliver a solution that's going to be as scalable as IATA Travel Pass. And the last thing I'm going to say is, when you hear me talk about the Trust over IP Foundation, we started last May with 27 members. We're now over 140. We are all about standardizing that stack. I'm very happy to say I'm here because Eva and Citizen joined as one of our steering members. And that opened that bridge. And we are here bringing together all the work being done at these various organizations into the Trust over IP stack so that we can solve these very hard problems together. And I think that's as much as you can as I could get across in the time allotted. I hope it hasn't been too much information. I do see now a note about going too fast. I apologize for that. I do tend to speed up as I get deeper into the subject. Anyway, I'll stop there and hand it back over to William.
Now, For the next session, we are delighted to have Dr. Anne Kavoukian. Anne is the Executive Director of Global Privacy and Security by Design Center and the former Information and Privacy Commissioner for the Canadian province of Ontario. And Anne is going to share with us the concept and principles of privacy by design. Now, can we actually switch over to Anne now? Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It's a pleasure to be with you. I'm speaking to you from Toronto, Canada, and we've had some Zoom problems, but hopefully this will work well. I'm going to talk to you about privacy by design, but I always like to start by dispelling the myths. You'll see, I always want to dispel the myths. The first myth, privacy does not equal secrecy. Privacy is not about having something to hide. It drives me crazy when people say, well, if you've got nothing to hide, you've got nothing to fear, right? What's the problem? The problem is that could have been the motto of the Stasi police in the Third Reich, because it implies that everything you do should be available publicly. That's not what privacy is about. That's not what freedom is about. Privacy is all about control. You'll see that privacy equals control. And then in the next slide afterwards, I expand upon this. User control, personal control is critical to privacy because you have to have the freedom of choice, the freedom to decide how you wish to have your information used and to whom you wish to have it disclosed. The Germans have a wonderful term for this called informational self-determination. It has to be the individual who determines the fate of his or her personal information. And one of the reasons for that is because context is key. Context is critical. Only the individual knows the context associated with his or her data. So only he or she can decide if they want to have the information disclosed or it's very private, personal, they want to keep it to themselves. This is critical. The Germans nailed it. Informational self-determination. In the next slide, you'll see that I talk about the essence of privacy, which is essential to freedom. You cannot have free and open societies without a solid foundation of privacy. Innovation, creativity, the resultant prosperity of a society requires freedom. Freedom is everything, and privacy is the essence of freedom. Without privacy, you can't have the rights that we value so much, individual human rights, property rights, civil liberties. These are the conceptual engines of innovation and creativity. They couldn't exist in any meaningful manner without privacy. But surveillance is the antithesis of privacy. And one of the negative consequences of surveillance is the usurpation of a person's limited cognitive bandwidth away from innovation and creativity. I'm a psychologist, I talk in this language of limited cognitive bandwidth, but that's exactly what it does. When you think someone is looking at you or watching what you're doing, you're always looking over your shoulder. You shrink inside mentally instead of having the crazy, wild, blue sky thinking that you need for wonderful innovation and creativity to build. I would like to give the story of Steve Jobs, the brilliant creator of Apple. He used to buy a new white Mercedes every 6 months, less a day. 6 months less a day, he would take his existing car to the dealership and buy another car, exact same make and model, and keep that for 6 months less a day. And this continued until he died. Why would he do this? Because in California at that time, you had up to 6 months before you were required to get a license plate on your car, the car on a new vehicle you bought. And he didn't want to have a license plate number. He didn't want to be tracked or surveilled. Freedom was very important. Privacy is critical to freedom. Now, in the next slide, I'm going to tell you about privacy by design. And this was something I created in my very first term as privacy commissioner. I was privacy commissioner of Ontario, Canada for 3 terms, like 17 years. And when I first started, remember I mentioned I was a psychologist. It was a very different perspective I brought than the lawyers in my office. What I wanted was some method of preventing the privacy harms from arising. I wanted a model of prevention proactively. I didn't want to just leave it to regulatory compliance after the fact, after the privacy infraction, after the data breach. You bring in the law and you apply it and you get a very important remedy. But I wanted to prevent the harms from arising, much like a medical model of prevention. So I created Privacy by Design, which is all about being proactive and preventing the privacy harms from arising. I had great success with this. It took a while. It took about 10 years, but in 10 years, I took it to once a year, privacy commissioners, data protection authorities have a conference. At that time, it was always in Europe. In 2010, it was in Jerusalem. And I introduced this and I said, let's make this an international standard so that we can all try to prevent the privacy harms from arising. And this is very different than the legal model. In fact, when I became commissioner, it took me a while to get my lawyers on side, but eventually they did. And what surprised me at this conference in Jerusalem in 2010, my proposal was unanimously passed. This international resolution unanimously passed by everyone, most of whom are brilliant, what I call lawyers, who love to drill down into Section 29, Sub 2, Part A, and apply that to the fact situation. That was wonderful, but it wasn't enough. So I was delighted. And after the conference, after the session, I went to my fellow colleagues, my fellow commissioners, and thanked them very much for all voting in favor of this. And I said, but I'm surprised. And they said, here's why we did it. In the next slide, you'll see they compared it to the tip of the iceberg. They said most privacy breaches now remain largely unknown, unchallenged, unregulated. We're just seeing the tip of the iceberg. With the massive growth of social media and online communication and everything connected, we're only seeing the tip of the iceberg. The majority of the privacy breaches were remaining unknown, unchallenged, unregulated. So they said that's why regulatory compliance is no longer sufficient in and of itself alone. It's unsustainable as the sole model for ensuring the future of privacy. So we had great success with this. And in the next slide, you'll see that Privacy by Design was translated into 40 languages. It's literally followed all around the world. And I was just so delighted. When I was commissioner, not a week would go by, I wouldn't hear from some jurisdiction, and they would tell me what they're doing in their respective country in these various languages. Now, in the next slide, you'll see there are two essentials to Privacy by Design. One, I've talked about, you have to be proactive, prevent the harms from arising. But the second one, which is equally as important and rarely considered, is you have to banish zero-sum models. A zero-sum model means you can only have a positive gain in one area, always to the detriment of the other area, so that the two total to a sum of zero. It's win-lose. It's never win-win. We have to get rid of that. You'll see in my next slide, I say that doesn't cut it anymore. What we have to do in the next slide, get rid of this dated model. Next slide, please. Banish these zero-sum models because, again, it's win-lose, either or. It's never both. And I discussed this with many of my colleagues to see if it would actually work. A lot of my technology colleagues, brilliant cryptographers, Bruce Schneier, who is one of the most brilliant cryptographers, I discussed it with him at length. And in the next slide, he said, Anne, it's a false dichotomy that it has to be either or. Instead, we should do positive sum. Positive sum means you can have two positive gains at the same time, privacy and security, not one versus the other. And it's as simple as creating a win-win scenario, not either or, involving, as Bruce Schneier said, unnecessary trade-offs and false dichotomies. Get rid of versus, one interest versus another, and substitute and. Privacy and security, privacy and business interests, always and. Now, if we go to the next slide, I'll just go through very quickly. There are 7 foundational principles to privacy by design. I've talked about the first one. You have to be proactive, prevent the harms from arising. Let me talk about privacy as the default setting for a moment, because this is critical. This is a game changer. Privacy as the default means you, customers, you don't have to ask for privacy. No. We embed it automatically as the default setting. You always get privacy. We are only permitted to use your information for the primary purpose intended that you consented to. We can't use it for anything else. And if a secondary use arises down the road, then we have to come back to you and seek your positive consent for that use. What I've been told by companies that do this is a game changer because it builds trust like no other. And there's such a trust deficit right now. So this is just a game changer. It's huge. Embedded in design speaks for itself. If it's seamlessly integrated into your design, you don't have to think about it. It's always there. I've talked quite a bit about full functionality, which is so critical. Positive sum gives you multiple positive gains instead of one interest versus the other, zero sum. Get rid of zero sum thinking. It's so yesterday. Let me talk about security for a moment. While the term privacy subsumes a much broader set of protections than one interest versus another, privacy subsumes a very broad set of interests. And it goes much beyond security. But in this day and age of daily hacking and phishing expeditions and everything, if you don't have end-to-end security with full lifecycle protection, you're not going to have any privacy. So you have to have very strong security at the foundation, always. Then you build on top of that with strong privacy. Privacy involves visibility and transparency. You have to keep it open to your data subjects. Always I like to remind companies and governments, it's not your data. It doesn't belong to you. Just because you have custody and control of the data doesn't mean you own the data. No, it belongs to the data subject. Give them a right of access to it. And what companies have told me is they win by giving customers access to their own data because companies say, look, we got thousands and thousands of pieces of data on people. We don't know if it's right or wrong, but the data subject always knows if the data is accurate or not. And they will immediately alert the company, but this isn't accurate. That was like so yesterday. Here's the more correct information. So companies have told me this enhances the quality of their information. Again, win-win. And respect for user privacy. I could have started with this because it's so important. If you start with user privacy at the center, keeping it user-centric, the rest of this flows. So this is privacy by design. To me, it seems like motherhood. It's not to most people, but if you start doing this, it will really work with you. So many companies have become certified for privacy by design, and they love it. And they said it just attracts new customers and builds trust like no other. In the next slide, you'll see that I talk about, just in case you're thinking, well, maybe this is interesting, but it doesn't work in real life, right? Wrong. It works very well. This goes back a number of years. We compiled a list of papers. This is operationalizing privacy by design, consists of 22 papers we did with all of the major tech companies. Think of any major tech company: Microsoft, Intel, HPE, Oracle, IBM, of course. I'm forgetting many of them, on all of these subject areas, because we wanted to show with companies this is eminently doable. And in fact, you will gain big time by doing this. I can give you examples later on. Remote home healthcare, remember we did that with Intel. People with the aging population, people want to still live at home, even if they're alone, but they might need some help from time to time. So Intel developed these sensors you can put on someone's bed, for example, so that if they get up in the middle of the night to use the restroom, but they don't return within a predetermined period of time, the sensor goes off and it alerts the 3 people you've consented to be alerted that there might be a problem. Please send people to see what's going on, send some help. And all of this is private. The data are encrypted, that are transmitted. It's beautiful. Anyway, you can take a look at this later. Now, in the next slide, I just want to show you, I love this. This is in my last days as privacy commissioner. And JIPDEC, the Japanese Information Processing Development Center, sent me this beautiful letter. And they said, we've heard from Japan's private sector companies that we need to insist on the principle of positive sum, not zero sum, and become enlightened with privacy by design. And I thought, oh my gosh, if the Japanese can understand the terms positive sum and how superior it is to zero sum, and English isn't their primary language, then surely the rest of us can figure this out with our English language. Now, you might say, okay, what's it going to cost me? Obviously, there's a cost associated with everything. But I assure you, doing privacy by design is a fraction of the cost you will incur if you don't do it, because you will get a data breach or privacy infraction. In the next slide, I talk about the cost of taking a reactive approach to privacy breaches as opposed to proactive. If you're proactive, it's a tiny cost. If you aren't, you will get data breaches, etc. And these days, they're not just lawsuits that are enacted, they're class action lawsuits that cost you millions of dollars. But the damage to your brand and the damage to your reputation may be irreparable. The loss of consumer confidence and trust is like this whenever these huge data breaches. There was a big consumer company in North America, in the United States, called Target, and they had a breach a number of years ago. The CEO of Target in the United States resigned. The CEO of Target Canada was fired. And then within a few months, all of the Targets in Canada shut down. There was no business. Trust went out the door and consumer confidence gone. So think about it. Be a little proactive, spend a little upfront, and then gain afterwards. Now, let me turn to the GDPR, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. In the next slide, the General Data Protection Regulation, which came into effect in the EU in 2018. And in the next slide, apart from strengthening privacy and giving citizens control over their personal data in Europe, which is so important, there was something even more important to me, which I show in the next slide, which was the fact that they added privacy by design and privacy as the default in the GDPR. In the EU, privacy is always referred to as data protection. So we have privacy commissioners in North America. In the EU, we have data protection commissioners. So privacy by design was included as data protection by design and as the default in the GDPR. This is huge, absolutely huge. It was a game changer. And in the next slide, now I wouldn't be so bold as to say this, but Information Age said that the similarities between privacy by design and GDPR are huge. They said it's not too much of a stretch to say that if you implement privacy by design, you've mastered the GDPR. I would not go that far. Believe me, there's much more to the GDPR than privacy by design. But I think the point she was making was that if you do privacy by design, you will satisfy many of the other requirements of the GDPR, because privacy by design is proactive and will address so many of those. In the next slide, you'll see that our Privacy Commissioner of Canada, in his annual report a number of years ago, who was talking about upgrading our privacy law in Canada, and he said we should do that and we should integrate privacy by design, because after all, they've done it in Europe, and privacy by design was created by a Canadian, one of ours, and so we should do this. And the year after this, our federal government responded in the next slide by issuing a paper called Towards Privacy by Design, review of the Personal Information Protection Electronic Documents Act, which was a federal private sector law in Canada. If we have time to discuss this later, we will, because unfortunately it did not go in that direction. I should also tell you in the next slide that there's so much that's been done in terms of privacy by design certification. We work with KPMG and PECB, and we work together, and we've certified so many companies. And the feedback we've received is that it's just taken off so well. Very, very pleased. Now, on the next slide, we've also done additional things to the GDPR. We've introduced a follow-up to privacy by design, which is a global privacy and security focus. We can talk about this later if we have time. And in the next slide, this is one of the additional things that was created, which global and privacy security experts from all around the world came together, and we formed this independent organization. And the founding members are amazing. Darren Entwistle is the CEO of TELUS, which is one of the major telcos in Canada. Michael Chertoff needs no introduction. He was the Secretary of Homeland Security in the United States. Jill de Kerchhoff was the Director of EU Counterterrorism. And Greg Wolfon, CEO of SecureKey. I can go on and on. All of these people signed up immediately because the whole point of this was we need privacy and security, not one versus the other. We need to work for positive sum outcomes, win-win outcomes. And we had great success with this. In the next slide, I just described very briefly, I think we're going the opposite direction. Well, we can go here. In this slide, I also talk about an online course that I offer for Privacy by Design. If you have any interest, it's online and it's all about how you can do privacy by design at your company or your organization. The whole point of privacy by design is to get the word out so that it can benefit as many people as possible. I'm going to switch in the next slide to decentralization of identity. And I'm going to go through this very quickly because I know I started a bit late, so I don't want to take up time in terms of the next session. If we could go to the next slide, please. And then the next slide after that. I forgot to mention, this is a new course I'm also teaching this year called Trust by Design, because I wanted to expand privacy by design into trust by design, because trust is what is missing. So let's talk about decentralization of identity. In the next slide, I talk about how centralization of personal data places control in the hands of those collecting the data, companies and governments, not individuals whose data is being gathered and used. And as I mentioned earlier, it should be individuals who are in control of their data, not the companies and governments. Decentralizing identity, decentralizing identifying personal information, returns control back to the data subject, which is where it belongs. So it works beautifully. And now, as you see in the next slide, there's a decentralization identity foundation. And in the next slide, we talk about this broad movement now that's taking place towards decentralization of identity. And it consists of many, many companies, both large and small, who are all committed to decentralizing identity and protecting privacy. In the next slide, I'm going to go very quickly now, because I'm just going to focus on one company, Microsoft's decentralization of identity. And I could talk about many others. Microsoft believes that everyone has a right to an identity that they own and control, that securely stores elements of their digital identity and preserves privacy. In the next slide, we talk about how policy alone is simply not enough. You need technical means are required to ensure that privacy is preserved beyond reliance on policy alone. In the next slide, we talk about how important DID is, de-identification. I say it equals privacy by design. It captures the essence of privacy by design in terms of decentralized identity. It's proactive, not reactive, and ensures user control. And DID has embedded privacy into its entire design, which is excellent. In the next slide, I talk about the strength of, I'm just going to continue because we're just running a little out of time. So privacy as the default setting is very important. In the next slide, privacy as the default is, as I mentioned, one of the criticals issues in privacy by design. It shows that privacy is automatically baked in. In the next slide, I talk about the strength of decentralized identity because it ensures user empowerment and personal control. This is so important, empowering users, which delivers a higher degree of trust. In the next slide, I always say no to false trade-offs. Once again, get rid of zero sum, embrace positive sum. We can do decentralized identity and privacy. And in the next slide, you'll see you also have end-to-end security, which I've talked about is so important. In the next slide, I always talk about privacy equals control. It's absolutely critical that individuals be in control of their data. In the next slide, I want to talk about verifiable credentials, which are so important as a service. And many companies offer this, not just Microsoft, of course. And it's very important, it's based on blockchains and ledgers to develop, all based on open standards. In the next slide, I talk about just IBM is another example of a company that's transforming digital identity into decentralized identity. And in the next slide, I talk about one of my favorite companies, Evernym, Drummond Reed, the brilliant head of Evernym. Evernym is the world's leading platform for verifiable credentials. They build and deploy self-sovereign solutions. So if you're interested in looking at decentralized identity more, go to Evernym, go to Drummond Reed, and you will learn everything you need. It's amazing. I'm almost done. In the next slide, I just want to talk about the growing support in the analyst community as well. A guidance for decentralized identity and verifiable claims, really growing strong ever since almost a year ago. Prepare for decentralized digital identity. It's coming. Blockchain is very big. Self-sovereign identity solutions. All of these started last year and will continue. So let me end, ladies and gentlemen, in the next slide by just talking about the vital need for decentralization of identity. This is the way forward to ensure that individuals remain in control. Self-sovereign identity, self-owned identity, which securely and privately stores one's personal information beautifully, can be seamlessly integrated into our lives, giving us full control over how our identity, our data is accessed and used. And DID reflects the essence of privacy by design, proactively embedding privacy as the default into the design of DID, decentralized identity, married to privacy by design, win-win. That's the ultimate solution. So in the next slide, I'm just going to end it off. If you ever have any questions, please email me. I always respond to emails because I always want to answer any questions you may have. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you, Anne. And do stay on because we are now into our panel discussion session. And this is the first time I run a panel session involving both physical panel members and virtual panel members. So let me first introduce the panel guests for today. We have, of course, Mr. Drummond Reed and Dr. Anne Cavoukian. We have listened to Drummond talking about the trust over IP, and he also mentioned the legal entity identifier and some of the examples that he has encountered, and just introduce privacy by design. But in addition to Drummond and Anne, we are also pleased to have with me by my side Dr. Albert Yu, Chairman and CEO and founder of HighCount Life Corporation. Mr. Gary Young is actually with us online. And Gary is the founder and chief executive officer of Texture Limited and president of the Hong Kong Smart City Consortium. Last but not least, we have Ms. Carla McKenna, head of standards of the Global Legal Entity Identifier Foundation. So the five of us, will be, sharing more insight, on this topic of distributed identity. So the first question, let me go over to, Gary. Gary, we heard this morning from Victor Lam, the Smart City 2.0 and the I Am Smart initiative. Now, we all know that digital identity is key to building online trust, and it's an important element of a smart city. Now, how do you see Hong Kong moving forward in adopting and extending this identity framework to support the Smart City initiative? Just want to hear your views, on this topic. Thank you.
Thank you, William. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. If you don't mind, let me share a little bit, a slide. Yeah, okay. From the smart city developments, we always talk about three stage. As mentioned by Williams, Hong Kong government is just doing the smart city blueprint 2.0 and just released it. And from smart city point of view, we always said that we have smart city 1.0, technology different. Actually, what we are talking about, LEI, bot train, etc., is technology different. But without the government support, without the policy support and a good digital infrastructures, it will not work. And finally, of course, we want to have a very good um, services provided to the citizens, get everybody involved. So smart city policy is most important. This is the history for smart city development. Starting from the digital 21 at a very early stage, we try to develop a very good digital infrastructure and environment to prepare for our future development in smart city. But at 2017, by the end of December of 2017, Hong Kong government released the Blueprint 1.0. At that moment, Smart City Consortium provided um, um, quite a lot of suggestions to the Hong Kong government, and they finally come up with 70 initiative. And just released the 2.0, we Hong Kong government is planning to implement more than 150 policy on also the implementation solutions within the government and the cities. This is a very big drum, but what we are focusing on today's panels, we will talk about the EID, electronic identity. In Hong Kong, we call it I'm Smart. Actually, it's an electronic identity that we offer to all citizens in Hong Kong, especially support their authentications and also the digital signing by using the key infrastructure, the infrastructures. So we are using this to help us to build a future trusted profile. Now we are focusing on the travel bubble, travel pass, but what we want to do also about the credential, how to work within the Greater Bay Area with a good health record, education profile, etc., etc. It's really important to have the identity over the internet. And I always said that EID is the base of the smart city development, and also trust and traffic is always come together. You have trust, then you have traffic, and you will have good transactions. Um, for individual, we are talking about EID. For company, we are planning to do the e-business restorations. The planning is just under discussions and low details at the moment, but I do believe Hong Kong will release the EBR very soon. So why we lead the EID and EBR or the trusted infrastructures? Because each cities, if they want to have a good smart city development, they need to have at least a digital infrastructure to support four important elements: the talents, logistic, capital, and information flow. The smart city policy must support both those to have cross-border trade, to develop our smart city cluster. And this is because I do my own research that about if we want to develop a good cross-border transactions um, um, uh, or would like to sign a legal binding contract over the internet, we must handle the four things at least. So why this is really important to us? In Hong Kong, our situation, our current major developments is talking about the Greater Bay Area in GBA. So if we are able to do a pilot in Hong Kong cross-border communications together with Shenzhen or other cities in Greater Bay Area, the whole model can be copied with other Asian countries or other countries, that we will be the hub to handle the trade or different services between the outside of China and the mainland China inside. So I would like to take this opportunity to share. We are really in a good position to think about the trust infrastructure, how to benefit not only the Hong Kong, but also the Greater Bay Area development. This is a little bit my sharing. Thank you.
Drummond, you introduced the digital distributed identity concept, and also share with us the IATA Travel Pass in this initiative. It's actually very interesting because in that case we are leveraging technology to help us combat the current COVID global challenge. Now, to have that sort of trusted framework, you need to actually have that trust not just meeting my requirement, but also the requirements of other countries and territories. So in that context, can you elaborate a bit more on how distributed identity framework actually enables, this kind of capability?
Yeah, happy to do that, William. I tried to show, the basics slides of the architectural, the players in that ecosystem, and that is a perfect example of why we call it a digital trust ecosystem, because it has many players, all of who are acting independently, but they need to cooperate and collaborate in order to achieve their trust goals. In this case, the passengers need to know that they can get the right task to take the itinerary that they want to take, whether it's one country or several countries they need to travel through. And so they need to know essentially what are the policies of those countries and those airlines and those airports, right? And meanwhile, the airline needs to know that the passenger has the right credentials to make that trip. Otherwise, as I've learned from IATA, if an airline flies you someplace and you do not have the credentials to get in, the airline has to repatriate you and fly you back on their dime, right? Very expensive, very inconvenient, bad experience. So what it ends up being, and then of course the governments have their requirements and they're shifting, right? There was no COVID policy even 6-9 months ago. Now they're developing them rapidly. So the key to the IATA digital trust ecosystem is, and the major thing that their governance framework is going to address is policy description, a standard way that they'll specify in their, and this isn't new for IATA. They have policies that describe government's requirements for visas, but also for vaccination credentials long before COVID, right? There are health requirements to get into certain countries, and the thematic database that IATA maintains on behalf of all of the airlines has tracked those things. So what they're doing is they're updating it with the policies that governments and airlines will have for COVID credentials, and then for testing credentials, and then vaccines. And the requirements for those policies and the technical specification for having them submitted to the thematic database are part of the governance framework. So an ecosystem governance framework covers policies at whatever layer it needs to produce the overall digital trust ecosystem. And that's why the IATA app will not only get you a verifiable credential, but it has a function for you to put in, hey, this is my destination, this is my itinerary, and it will come back and say, this is the set of tests you need. And the really cool part is it will then check the member directory based on where you're located, where you're starting from, and say, here's the labs where you can get the tests you need. So I think that's, it's going straight to, call it the postgraduate level for an ecosystem governance framework, but that's what they need to do. And by the way, they are committed from the outset, privacy by design. It wasn't, I didn't even have to mention the term to them. It's just built in, it's a requirement, they know it, and they've been listening to Anne.
So this is not just about adopting a technology. This requires many people to work together, governments, agencies, organizations, and so on. Excellent. Now, I just, to kind of take that point further, I just want to kind of get comments from Anne. Now, we talk about privacy by design, and you mentioned that, it's not a zero-sum game. You have to, enable the data subject to have a choice of what to disclose and so on. Now, very often, particularly if we look at the current COVID situation, whilst it is true that you kind of enable the data subject to say, I want to share this and not that, the needs of the individual and the needs of, say, the health agencies could be quite different. The health agencies may want more information to do analysis and so on. So what is your experience in this, where there are conflicting needs from the individual and whoever is the user of the data, and how to balance that, in the context of ensuring privacy?
To ensure that the public health authorities, who are the groups that would like the data and analyze it and do all that, which has value, there's no question. When they choose to do that, they have to do it in a de-identified manner. De-identification is absolutely critical, and it has to be done very securely and strongly, and not just stripping the name and the number, but you have to follow very strong de-identification protocols, because otherwise this is going to be a nightmare in terms of surveillance. Public health authorities will have your COVID information, which they could use for purposes of tracing and doing it in a way that is not privacy protective, but in a way that will ultimately lead to surveillance. You see, eventually the COVID pandemic will come to an end. What we can't have come to an end is our privacy as a result of this pandemic. Early this year, I think it was like March, April, right at the beginning of the COVID pandemic, 300 of the world's leading epidemiologists, doctors from all around the world, 26 countries, wrote an open letter to their governments. And they said, if you are not extremely careful to protect the data that you collect relating to COVID, this will mount in massive surveillance, which will just do us in. It will be completely unacceptable. Freedom will go out the door. And these were epidemiologists who wrote this letter, 300 of them for 26 countries. This is a major concern for people all around the world. And believe me, I've been through this many times. 9/11 wasn't all that long ago. And the problem is you have one of these major pandemics or concerns, and the surveillance that is mounted during the pandemic, because emergency powers can be invoked to basically eradicate privacy laws at the time, they're rarely revoked afterwards. That's how we have to be vigilant to insist upon proper protections. You can engage in limited contact tracing in a way that is also privacy protective. We've done this here in Canada. We have something called the COVID Alert, which is a completely privacy protective app that users choose to download. Their identity is not revealed, nothing. It will alert them if they come into contact with someone who is 2 meters from them in a public situation. And then they can choose whether to see their physician or go to a public health authority or whatever. So the point is, you can do privacy and protecting society in terms of this pandemic. There are many examples of this, but we have to insist upon this. I can't emphasize this enough. Having gone through this before, the last thing we want to do is come out of the pandemic with our privacy completely wiped out and our freedoms out the door. That's not how we're going to live, and we have to insist upon that now. That's what I'm doing.
So let me move on to Carla. This morning, can you all hear me still? Yes. Okay. So this morning we heard about the legal entity identifier, and this afternoon we will have a more kind of detailed session on the topic. But for the time being, can you provide more insight about the LEI and share with us, given our discussion on privacy and so on, share with us a bit more on the type of information collected and maintained in the global LEI system, Carla?
Thank you, William. So the idea of an international standard for a legal entity identifier came from a call from the regulators after the 2008 financial crisis, and was endorsed by the Group of 20, the Financial Stability Board, and many regulators around the world, concentrating on those regulators who are financial regulators and regulators of capital markets. And so the Global Legal Entity Identifier Foundation and System was founded in 2014 by the Financial Stability Board, and still was founded and to this day operates under regulatory oversight of public authorities. So we have very, very much our history anchored in the financial services regulatory space, but the Global LEI Foundation was always meant to be a public-private partnership. And the data that we collect through our partners around the world, 39 of them at the present count, actually reflects the needs and the data collection needs of both the public and the private sector. So we collect through our partner network entity level data, the name of the legal entity as appears in its formation documentation and registration, headquarters address, legal form. We also have implemented certain relationship data, including accounting data from a direct and ultimate parent perspective. Next year, we are to implement relationship data regarding funds, because one of I think one of the confusions about the global legal entity identifier system is that we only collect data on financial firms. We collect data on any number of legal entities, including trusts and partnerships and companies all around the world. So this is the kind of data that is put in the global legal entity identifier system, and is free to any data user in the world who wants to be able to access the data and to download it or to search it and to be able to use and adopt in analysis or for any other purpose.
Are we in a situation now where we extend it from the financial services sector to the non-financial side? I mean, that seems to be the direction.
Oh, there are presently 1.7 million and counting legal entity identifiers that have been assigned. And even from the beginning, even when the focus was more on regulatory reporting in response to the financial crisis, there always were non-financial firms that needed to be able to register for legal entity identifiers, because of the fact in two particular areas that they were subject, because of their actions, maybe they were subject to commodity reporting under Dodd-Frank or EMIR in the time of the first regulations that were enacted after the financial crisis, because of the fact that they took commodities positions, for example, or any number of payment transactions were the first implementations or the first registrations of non-financial companies into the LEI system.
Thank you, Carla. Thank you. And now let me move on to Albert. We talk about the the use of identity in the COVID situation. You have a lot of experience with medical labs, and it is a key stakeholder in this trust infrastructure. What are your views on this usage of identity and the requirements that you see that we can actually apply this to enable a better response to COVID and other situations?
Thank you, William. To be honest, it's kind of shame for us to be mastered to talk to each other, and I think we should aware what's going on right now. At the moment, when I check what's going on right now, we have close to 90 million people confirmed with COVID-19 now. And then more than 1/5 of these people confirmed cases in the United States. And then today, I look at the data, we have 22 million cases in the US. And then you have 200,000 confirmed cases. Now, you'll be surprised that as a scientist myself, we found we are in such kind of situation. People always think about the COVID-19 cases is a medical problem or something medicine can take care of it. But we all understand that right now, this is not like that. It is a science and technology problem because we didn't use science and technology correctly in the last few decades. That's why we get into such a pandemic with no help. As you can see that, if I remember, when I first got into internet, I think it's so wonderful because they create another world for us. In there, we have no boundary. There's no restriction. We can do basically anything, or I can be anybody. But later on, we have found that when we try to use this technology to do something more serious, we found that we cannot do it because we have no privacy, we have no security. So in the internet world, I think it's about time for us to get something, a policy, a rule, so we can properly use this technology to help us to get into another era. For example, Gary mentioned about smart city. Smart city is how to utilize this technology correctly. Not only the IT technology, also healthcare technology, everything. How do we integrate them into a smart city? A smart city is not just using technology, make sure the population, that the citizen in there properly understand how to use this technology properly. Now, right now, if we get back to this pandemic, I can see that if we have no technology, we cannot fight this war against the Mother Nature because it's a global pandemic. It's a global war. Every one of us are fighting against a small virus that we cannot see. Now, like such as we are the medical technologists, we'll try to find out how to deal with it. First, we have to find the diagnosis, the proper diagnosis. So we make sure we can detect, distinguish whether you are infected or you are infected but with no symptom. But we try to use diagnosis to differentiate who has no infection, who has infection but has no symptom, and who has symptom and at the same time they're infected. And another problem comes up because we always say that, wow, I have a flu or we have COVID-19. So in that case, we also need something to distinguish from flu patient or COVID-19 patient. Because when you are coughing nowadays, everybody will run away from you because they expect that many infectious diseases are similar symptoms. They would expect you have COVID-19. That's why technologically, we have to derive and other technologies. A single test can distinguish COVID-19 from flu and other infectious disease. They are not spreading infectious very much, but they have the similar symptom. Then we get to another problem is that every day, even in Hong Kong, I think in any other country too, we have many imported cases. They're not from local. Now, every day we have over 10 imported cases. What does that mean? That means, these people, they come into the country, before they check in onto the plane, they have shown evidence that they have tested COVID-19. They are free. But what happened when they are on the plane and come to Hong Kong, they have become positive. And that's just very dangerous. Think about if the pandemic is eased down a little bit when we start to travel. And we all said that we have tested we have a certificate. How can we prove that this is the correct, this is accredited, or this is done by a proper laboratory? In Hong Kong, we have the Ministry of Food and Health, and they are having a lot of accredited lab announced. And are this lab being known by other countries, or are this being recognized, the certificate being recognized? This is how I'm worrying about, because in order, we wish the pandemic will disappear soon, especially if the vaccination comes in. But another problem, again, vaccination is not 100% success, effective. So in the future, for example, if I told you that I have vaccinated, okay, but I'm still coughing, what are you going to do? Okay, my God, everybody's run away, even you say I'm vaccinated. So we need an accredited lab or a certificate to prove that I am vaccinated or I'm tested using molecular biology, genetic tests, proven that I am free from COVID-19. I have no virus in my body. So with that, I can travel free. But why other countries trust me? Just like we trust a lot of countries and they import a lot of cases into Hong Kong. And we have to mutually agree a system to prove that our certificate, what we have done to ourselves, to be accepted. Okay, so in that case, when this pandemic ease down a little bit, when we start to recover our economy so we can travel, I think what Drummond has mentioned about the travel pass, now we have to have something, an ID, as I mentioned. So in the internet world, the digital world, if we have a certificate that is being mutually agreed, and then it doesn't have to worry too much about privacy because we give them enough information, and we have cloud up there that we can store a lot of information, and internet reduce the system, the distance into zero, and also reduce the time into zero. So in that case, the global problem solved by a global recognition of the public key. Now, I think the key and EID are very important for us to utilize internet to be our tool to facilitate us to do something proper. If not, I think no matter how many tests we have done, how many vaccinations we have done for our citizens, we still would not trust these people to get onto the plane and travel. And not to mention about cross the border. Now, they are doing really well in China, but Hong Kong is one country, two system. We are doing a different system. But I think, this is a global problem. So I'm very happy today, KPI Forum put this together because internationally, we have to solve this together. Now, as a medical technologist, I would really like the ID being recognized by the rest of the world because this is something very serious, I tell you. Because if you don't have the proper ID, if you let one person go into your country, the certification or test is wrongly done by an accredited laboratory, you are asking for trouble, I tell you. You only need one person to go into your country, or you only need to meet one person, they are not properly tested, then you're in trouble. So I wish this KPI stuff, the digital identity, we should not talk too much about privacy because we really honor privacy. We know how to deal with it. And the internet security, we put all this together. Not only we can walk out from this pandemic utilizing technology, I mean both IP, AD, AI, blockchain, whatever, to help us to go through this. Then what we have done in the medical technology will become useful and helpful for us to get back to normal. So that's just what I think. Okay. Yeah.
Thank you, Albert. Now, let me remind the audience that there is a function, on the on Zoom for you to ask questions. There's a Q&A button, on the top of your at the bottom of your screen. So if you have any question at all for any of the panel members, please kind of type in your questions so that we can relate to the members. But whilst we are waiting, for some of your ideas. Gary, I think you're still online. Yes. Can I just, listening to, all the discussion that we just had, it seems that, having that identity framework, not just for the individual, but also for laboratories and so on, to enable us to get out of the COVID situation, is actually quite an urgent task. And, it requires not just kind of efforts within Hong Kong, but also kind of a collaboration with other countries and territories. What are your views in terms of, enabling this through the smart in a smart city consortium? What do you think? Governments need to kind of support. Just want to kind of hear your views on this.
Okay, thank you, William. As I mentioned, that I do believe it's always the policy or rules and regulations behind the technologies. So the government need to catch up and relax the rules and regulations. Of course, we need to focusing on the privacy protection, security, etc. But we need the room for the new technologies deploy and also fully implement in the society. Also, as mentioned by Albert, under one country, two systems, different countries would like to do business with in China. If we do a good pilot or demo here for the mutual recognitions, no matter the health record or other things, it would be very good to copy in other countries. So we still, no matter the pandemic, what's going, how to happen in the futures, we are able to do the business as usual.
Truman, I had a kind of a thought, in my head. Today we are in a physical world. We are used to verifying identity by showing our photo IDs. It's really, moving to a digital equivalent. In your experience, what do we as citizens need to do differently? Can we, how can we best adapt to this digital world? Anything we need to be aware of? I know some of people will be concerned, if my digital credentials is on a device, what if I lose my device and so on? So what as you have involved in the rollout of digital identity, what is your experience, on the side of the citizen, on the the participants? Anything, that they need to do differently?
It's a really good question, William, and I'm going to try and give a relatively short answer because we could talk about that the rest of the day, right? One of the reasons that the newest of the 7 working groups at Trust ToIP Foundation is called Human Experience Working Group. It's not just user experience, it's human experience, because trust is a human experience, right? And you're absolutely right. And it goes far beyond UI, and you're totally right. This set of questions, in fact, I'll say right away, we don't know the answer to that yet because there have never been verifiable credentials in production in the world today. So we have to take both at the same time, I know this sounds strange, a conservative approach in terms of security and privacy and data protection, while at the same time an innovative approach to take advantage of digital credentials and what they can do that physical credentials can't. So the very first thing that I'm seeing, it's been a recommendation from Evernym for a while from our team, and now we're seeing it adopted, which is don't think that, and I'm gonna hold up my 2 favorite props here, right? The wallet, I'll keep the credit card inside there. And the credit card wants to fall out, right? The wallet and the phone. these are not enemies, okay? It's not, we're gonna drop this and move to this. Now there are millennials that have done that, right? The new iPhone even has the thing that, you know, clips on the back, so they can only have to carry one thing. But these are not enemies, okay? One of the key ways to address the potential of digital credentials worsening the digital divide is to make sure that credentials are available in both forms. So you can use a physical credential, and for the most important verifiable credentials, you will have a you know, paper or plastic option, and that covers, of course, people who don't have the digital option. But it also gives you literally a backup, a physical backup, makes you comfortable, makes you confident. The irony is, when it comes to this question of loss, right? Pretty much it's the first question when I'm explaining verifiable credentials to a general purpose audience. I'll explain the basics, won't go quite as deep as I did today because you're a PKI forum, right? I'll explain the basics, and the very first question, you can almost set a stopwatch. Who's going to ask, what do you do if you lose your phone, right? It's a great question. The irony is, I will hold up these two and I'll say, guess which of these two is going to be safer? Guess which of these two in the end is going to be more private, done right? Is this one. This can be smart about backing itself up, encrypted where you want it. So if you lose it, you can literally get a new phone and be recovered in, you know, as fast as you can get that new device, download it, and go through a recovery protocol. I spent 2 years on the contract with U.S. Department of Homeland Services. Part of what we're looking at is what is going to be necessary for recovery for an average internet user, someone who just uses email and the web. I'm not saying it's a solved problem, but architecturally, we think the answer is a pretty clear answer. So I think there's going to be a lot of adjustment. The example I gave you is the one that we're finding is prevalent. People who have used a mobile boarding pass and are using an Apple Wallet or a Google Wallet, they get it. They get the basics, like, okay, all right, give me some assurance that it's reasonably safe, and they'll start using it as long as they don't have to put too much, like, oh, if I lose that, I lose my life. They'll start using it more and more. They'll get used to it. And, you know, I just think there was a day, I'm old enough to remember when a browser was a brand new tool, right? No one had used a browser before. And now, of course, we can't even think of a day without a browser. I think we're headed in that direction with digital wallets, and we will learn enormously about that. But as long as we build in privacy by design and security by design from the outset, and, you know, don't go hog wild, I think we'll be okay.
You know, I kind of noted on the slide, and you know, you also mentioned that you know, that comment that, you know, if you master privacy by design, you know, you've mastered the GDPR, and beyond the EU GDPR, you know, what is being done at a global level, you know, just to kind of share with us a bit more, so that, you know, if we were to conform to privacy by design, you know, our approach method can be globally acknowledged or recognized. I mean, you know, how far has this you know, gone down to make sure that, you know, everyone is comfortable or acceptable, you know, accepting this concept?
As I mentioned, we have been doing privacy by design certifications globally, literally from all around the world, because companies want to demonstrate to their customers and to the public that they're doing the real privacy by design, and they're protecting both the privacy and security of their information. One of the key points I have to raise, though, in the context of, you know, digital travel credentials and things of that nature associated with this, is we have to be very, very careful that the information resides on our smartphone privately and securely through verifiable credentials that Drummond was talking about. My concern is always, though, that governments should not be able to gain access to this information. If you want to reveal information to them during your travel, etc., of course, that's your prerogative. But my very big concern is the creation of perhaps backdoors and governments routinely gaining access to this information, which would then expand not just to that information, but your travel information. You know, you went from point A to point B on such and such a date. You could merge that possibly with other individuals you may be traveling. So much can be revealed by getting access to this information. So these are the things we have to guard against. You always worry about privacy and security. Don't give me, you know, don't worry about privacy. Are you kidding me? Do you know how easily it can be lost and go out the door? Governments are gaining greater control on a daily basis. It is staggering to me from the time that I was privacy commissioner, not that long ago, to what's happening now. And the COVID is one example. You know, we have privacy laws everywhere. There are emergency powers within privacy laws that enable the government to gain access to your information during emergencies like the pandemic. And I can't tell you the number of media interviews I've done on this, especially at the beginning of the pandemic when governments were saying, we're going to gain access to everything and connect it and share it. People were going crazy because who then puts a stop to that at the end? How can we be assured that information collected by the government under emergency powers is limited and then securely deleted? These are the things we have to ensure that we keep on top of. And that's one of the things that I'm urging everyone to be aware of and to address very strongly.
Having kind of discussed all that, any kind of further thoughts on the challenges for deploying this infrastructure? What are the things that we can do better, more efficiently to have this mechanism in place to address the problem that you've just described?
I think the title for this meeting has already says it. Digital trust ecosystem. The trust is something that we have to build up. How are we going to build up trust? Because we had internet for so many years. I myself is a user of it, but often I still ask the question: can I trust the system? Can I use my credit card? Put my credit card onto the internet? See, as a medical technologist and a scientist, I always think there's more solution than problems. That's something that I always believe. So the trust is because we have problems not solved, and a lot of people misunderstand the technology. That's why there's no trust. Why there's no trust among countries? Because they do not understand the good intention behind all this what we are doing. So I think in order to make sure we build up this trust, we have to talk more, communicate more. Another thing is education, because a lot of people, you think, we know internet, but when I really talk to an internet specialist, I found I don't know very much. So I think education is very important, especially Gary, when you talk about smart city. I think in order to make the city smart, first of all, you really have to have education to make sure your citizens are smart enough to understand technology. Again, as I mentioned, are we ready for this era? Like pandemic, obviously we understand that no country in this world are ready for this pandemic. Then I'll ask another question. Are we ready for coming out from this pandemic? Are we well prepared? So I think we are not ready. But another question I'll ask, are the technology ready? No, I think the internet technology are all ready, but whether we utilize them properly, either we are united and talk about how to utilize it properly, this is very important. It is not only the technologies can push forward this idea. We need the government, politician, policymaker, and university professor, and then go down to educate our students and our fellow citizens. Don't forget about the elderly too, because we have to educate them. So the citizen means everybody. So we have to educate them to make them, they are on the same pace as we are. Even they are not at the same pace, they are not too far away or too far behind. So they found us as a strange group of people. As technology-wise, as you can see that diagnostic came out very fast. Although we still have different technologies, diagnosis technology, they have different sensitivity, specificity. So we still have false positive, false negative running around us. But that's fine. It's better than we don't have it. Vaccination, vaccine production, as you can see, because of the pandemic, we can produce vaccine very fast. We are still waiting for the therapy. But no matter what, after we get all this done, how are we going to help the world to move forward or move out from this pandemic? In Hong Kong, we already set up a lot of internet apps to trace the asymptomatic patient or people, they have close contact with the infected people. So as an end user, as a medical technologist, I think the KPI or this symposium will bring us together to really use the technology. They are already here to move us forward, to help all the other technology out. So this is, as I mentioned, this is the era of integration of technology. And now we have the internet privacy expertise over here. We have policy makers. We have global people there in WHO, etc. So all this are very important to all of us, because nowadays we are not doing something just for ourselves, because anything we do will be beneficial to all over the world. I have a chance to talk to a very high official from Peru last night. Okay. They are the forgotten part. We forgot. We still have Africa. We still have Peru. We still have South Africa. We still have a lot of countries in Southeast Asia. We have to make sure they are also safe using technology to help them to move forward during this pandemic. Because if they are not safe, we are not safe. So it's the same thing. So I think as a scientist or medical technologist, I'm very happy to be here today because I learned a lot. I think this forum will be very important. I have a chance to talk, to watch, to see a lot of message and news like WHO said. They are doing everything in the same line. I think hopefully we were able to unite the internet world, because a world like that become a very important part of our life. But it has no order, it has no policy, it has no regulation, it has no trust in that. So I think we have to teach people that we are not going to take the world from them, because they get used to be free over there. But if we want to utilize the internet to help us to move into a smart city, smart government, smart world, I think we will have to build up the trust among ourselves and build up the key, build up the ID, so we can utilize this technology to help us move forward. Thank you very much. William.
And thank you, Albert. I think that the time is, almost, kind of coming up to noon. I think, thank you all for the panel members. Let me thank, Drummond, Carla, Anne, Albert, Gary, to have your time to share with us, on this topic. Let's actually break for lunch. We will continue at 2 p.m. There will be a different, a separate link to the event. So please use that. Looking forward to seeing you all for further discussion on the topic this afternoon. Have a good lunch, a break, and see you later. Thank you.